Hello students, this is your history lesson. Today we are going to study about the ancient Greek civilization and learning. Chapter 9 from Understanding History for class 6. So we start our lesson. This is page number 43 from your book. The Persian Empire gave way to the Greek civilization which contributed the most to the modern world. Greek ideas, building styles, and ways of government are still in use. It was a civilization much ahead of its time. The idea of group sports is found in the Olympic Games, and the democratic form of government found in ancient Greece is followed by many nations today. Athens became the capital of Greece and is quoted as the cradle of Western civilization. Students, democratic means based on a form of government in which people choose leaders by voting, and cradle of civilization means it is any location where civilization is understood to have independently emerged. Students, in previous chapter we learned about the Persians. The Persians were defeated by the Greeks. But who were the Greeks? The ancient Greeks lived in Greece and land that is now part of Turkey. Greece is in the continent of Europe. The Greek period, which has most influenced our lives, lasted from about 500 to 400 BC and was centered on Athens. It is called the Golden Age or the Classical Age of Greece. During the Classical Age, Athens was the richest and most important of the Greek city-states. Athens was quite different. From this city came almost everything that the world today owes to ancient Greece. Athenians loved new ideas, education, and discussions on many subjects. For these reasons, Athens became a center for new developments in many aspects of life, including learning, religion, and government. And Athens was named after Athene. Athene. Athene was also the goddess of courage, crafts, and victory. The ancient Greeks. The Greeks were people who lived around the Aegean Sea from where they had access to the Mediterranean. The area was mountainous and there was very little land to farm. Most Greeks settled on the coast and made their living from the sea by fishing. In time, the coastal settlements grew into city-states and Greece had nearly 150 of them, each ruled by a king or noble family. The strongest of these city-states were Athens and Sparta. Athens grew rich through trade as it also had a strong navy. It became the cultural center of Greece with fine buildings and temples, and its people were fond of education and learning. Theater, literature, and mathematics were the subjects of conversation in the marketplace. Sparta was different and gave importance to the martial arts. Most young Spartans were trained from an early age to become soldiers. Students, the Greek mainland is divided by rocky mountain ranges, and the Aegean Sea has many small inlands in it. The geography of the area made communication and trade difficult. It was easier to travel about by boat than by land. Because of this, settlements grew up near the sea. People could also catch fish here, and the flatter coastal land was better for farming. For 1,000 years before the Greek civilization reached its height, there had been civilizations in the area. In time, coastal settlements grew up to become city states until there were 150 of them, each ruled by a king, a family, or a group of rich nobles and landowners. So there were two famous states. One was Athens and the other was Sparta. Athens was the richest and most important city state, and the second important state was Sparta. Sparta did not have great temples or fine buildings as Athens have had. But the city was little more than a collection of villages. The Spartans were a fierce and warlike people whose life was centered on military skills. Each new baby was examined. If it looked weak, it was left outside to die. Every Spartan boy was trained from the age of 7 to be a tough fighter. He spent most of his life as a full-time soldier, living away from his family. Greek mythology. The Greeks believed in many gods who, they said, lived on Mount Olympus in the north of the country. Zeus was the king of gods, and there were gods for everything from the sun, moon, and planets to love, hunting, and wisdom. The gods had human qualities and came down from Mount Olympus to fight, help humans, or even marry. The temples to the gods were constructed with beautiful columns and adorned each city-state. A whole series of stories or myths grew around the characters and lives of the gods and are known today as Greek mythology. So, students, the ancient Greeks worshipped many gods and goddesses in temples. We can still see the remains of many of their temples and statues. The ancient Greeks believed that their gods and goddesses looked and behaved like humans, but had magical powers and could live forever. They believed that different gods and goddesses were in charge of different things. The god Apollo was in charge of the sun, and they believed rode in a golden chariot that pulled the sun across the sky. The ancient Greeks believed that their 12 main gods and goddesses were a family who lived at the top of Mount Olympus. Their main god was called Zeus. Moreover, the Greeks thought the gods behaved like humans. For example, got married, quarreled, and told lies. The gods were said to live on Mount Olympus in northern Greece, but they sometimes came down disguised as human beings, animals, or even as a force of nature, such as the wind. The Greeks believed that the gods helped them to win wars and get good harvests. But it was easy to make the gods angry, to try to please them, people offered prayers and animal sacrifices and held religious festivals. Like the Sumerians, they built temples as houses for the gods and put statues of the gods in them to show that the god lived there. Democracy as a form of government. What the Greeks are most famous for is the system of government called democracy. In Greek language, the word demos means people and kratein means to rule. After 500 BCE, Athens became a democracy and each free citizen could meet in the assembly 40 times in a year and discuss the laws and improvements to the state. The assembly elected judges and a council of 50 men to carry out the laws made by the citizens. However, women and slaves were not allowed to participate in the assembly. Students, one of the most important ideas that Athens gave to the world was democracy. It means a system in which the people rule and make decisions or are ruled by those they choose. Different states have different systems of ruling. Here are some of them. Monarchy, ruled by a king. His power was usually inherited. Oligarchy, ruled by a few rich people. Dictatorship, ruled by one man who makes all the laws. Athens did not want any of these systems, and in about 510 BC it began a system of democracy. A council of 500 men from all over Greece and a large people's assembly was formed. All adult males, except for slaves born in the city, were citizens and had to attend the assembly and vote and make decisions about the running of the city. Women could not be citizens. The council decided on new laws. Then the assembly met 40 times a year on a hill called Senex. People were expected to attend the assembly unless 6,000 citizens or more were there. The meeting could not take place. The new laws decided on by the council were discussed by the assembly, which could agree with them, disagree, or change them. Everybody had a right to speak once, but the crowd interrupted and shouted whenever they disagreed. Voting was done by a show of hands. The other feature that set the Greeks apart from others in Europe was their learning and education. They were known for their philosophers, scholars, writers, and scientists such as Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Archimedes, who are famous for their knowledge and admired even today. Herodotus is called the father of history, and Hippocrates was famous for his writings on medicine. Pythagoras' theorem about triangles is still in use today, and Archimedes is considered the most brilliant mathematician and engineer of his time. Athens was the seat of knowledge in those days. Greeks were the first people to write about on history and geography. These books did not just describe things but also explained how and why things happened. Greek influence lives on today not only in knowledge but also in classical buildings around the world, in the Olympic Games, and in the writing of plays and the theaters for performing them. Students, Greek scientists and thinkers try to work out the answers to questions about life and the universe, and their ideas change the way that people have thought about things ever since. The Greeks' curiosity led them to make many discoveries. One of the greatest Greek scientists was Aristotle, who was also a philosopher. Another Greek scientist, Archimedes, made a great discovery. Archimedes' invention of a hollow screw is still used around the world today by farmers for raising water and moving grain. Pythagoras studied geometry and other branches of mathematics. His theory about the sides of right-angled triangles is still taught today in schools. It is called Pythagoras theorem. Pythagoras also said that the world was round at a time when many people thought it was flat. Hippocrates was the most famous Greek doctor. He founded a hospital and wrote books on medicine. He kept a careful watch on patients and made written records of their symptoms. Greek doctors realized the importance of exercise, diet, and being clean, although they didn't know about bacteria and germs. Many doctors today follow the rules first used by Hippocrates. The Greeks studied the skies and made maps of the stars. These maps helped them to navigate ships. They also invented machines to measure angles and distances and so were able to steer ships at night and when out of sight of land. The Greeks were also the first people to write books on history and geography. They did not just describe past events, but they tried to explain why and how things happened. They did not always find the right answers to their questions, but their ideas have had a large influence on civilizations. A famous Greek, Alexander of Macedon. The most famous of Greek conquerors, Alexander came from Macedonia to the north of Greece. His father, King Philip, was an ambitious ruler who conquered the greater part of Greece in 338 BCE, but he died 2 years later. He was succeeded by Alexander, who at the age of 20 decided to conquer the known world both in the east and the west. He had been educated well. He was a pupil of Aristotle and trained in military leadership by his father. Alexander was successful as a conqueror because of his military tactics, tricks, and the skill of his army. They fought in a formation known as the phalanx, with men marching close, carrying long spears to attack the enemy. Alexander defeated the Persians led by Darius III and destroyed their capital Persepolis in 331 BCE. He then marched on with his army right up to the banks of the Indus and defeated the Hindu king Porus. He wished to go further, but his soldiers refused as they were tired and sick of fighting. Alexander turned back, but he left behind Greek governors for the conquered land. The movement of Greek armies and officials led to the spread of Greek influence around the conquered countries. We know about the Greeks through the Gandhara culture in the northwest of the subcontinent. Students, as soon as Alexander became king, he began to carry out his father's plans. His first act was to stop a rebellion of the Greek states. In a short time, all except Sparta had been overcome and agreed to support him. He quickly proved himself to be a brave soldier and a brilliant leader of men. Like his father, Alexander is often called a military genius. He developed clever fighting techniques and trained his cavalry to support the infantry. For these reasons, he could defeat his enemies. He had enormous courage and energy and was able to inspire great loyalty in his army. These qualities helped him to build up the greatest empire the world had yet seen. Students, Alexander started a campaign which was to last 11 years, during which he traveled more than 32,000 kilometers. He went to war against the Persian Empire with an army of 30,000 infantry, soldiers on foot, and 5,000 cavalry. He defeated the Persian ruler Darius III at the Battle of Issus in 333 BC. He conquered Afghanistan, Egypt, the Persian Empire, areas in Asia Minor, and parts of the subcontinent. Alexander then swept through Syria, Palestine, and Egypt. In 331 BC, he marched back into Persia and defeated Darius III again. A year later, Darius was murdered and Alexander, aged 26, became ruler of the vast Persian Empire, in addition to the Greek one. During his campaigns in Persia and elsewhere, he founded new cities, many of which he called Alexandria after himself. In the brief span of 10 years, span the period of time, Alexander had created a large empire comprising Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, present-day Turkey and Israel, and the Indus Basin in the subcontinent. He knew he had to rule well to keep his empire together. He left behind his generals as governors in the conquered regions. He admired the Persian culture and adopted some of it. He encouraged his soldiers to marry women of the kingdoms he had defeated. The conquered people were allowed to keep their own laws, customs, and religion. After his death at the young age of 33, Alexander's empire broke up into three parts, each ruled by one of his generals. Students, as we have learned about Alexander, that he had created a large empire, including the countries Egypt, Persia, present day Turkey, Israel, and many parts of the subcontinent. To help unite his massive empire, Alexander forced many of his soldiers to marry Persian women. Greek traders who followed the army settled and set up small colonies. Greek became the most common language in the Middle East. Greek styles of art and architecture spread widely during his conquests. Alexander founded 25 Greek styles cities, They were planned and laid out in a grid pattern with marketplaces, buildings, and statues in the Greek style. After Alexander's death, his generals fought for control of his empire. By 275 BC, it had been divided into three parts, each under the rule of a general. Now come to the questions. Question 1. What does the modern world owe to the ancient Greeks? Answer. Greek ideas, building styles, and ways of government are still in use. It was a civilization much ahead of its time. The idea of group sports is found in the Olympic Games, and the democratic form of government found in ancient Greece is followed by many nations today. Question 2. How was Greece divided for governance? Answer. Greeks are most famous for the system of government called democracy. Athens became a democracy and each free citizen could meet in the assembly 40 times in a year and discuss the laws and improvements to the state. The assembly elected judges and a council of 50 men to carry out the laws made by the citizens. However, women and slaves were not allowed to participate in the assembly. Question 3. Describe the discoveries and inventions made in ancient Greece. Answer. Greek influence lives on today, not only in knowledge but also in classical buildings around the world, in the Olympic Games, and in the writing of plays and the theaters for performing them. Question 4. Write a note on the religion of the ancient Greeks. Answer. The Greeks believed in many gods who, they said, lived on Mount Olympus in the north of the country. Zeus was the king of gods, and there were gods for everything from the sun, moon, and planets to love, hunting, and wisdom. The gods had human qualities and came down from Mount Olympus to fight, help humans, or even marry. Question 5. How far do you think were the ancient Greeks really democratic? Answer. One of the most important ideas that Athens gave to the world was democracy. Athens did not want any of these systems, and in about 510 BC it began a system of democracy. A council of 500 men from all over Greece and large people's assembly were formed. The new law decided the new law decided on by the council were discussed by the assembly, which could agree with them, disagree, or change them. Everybody had a right to speak once, but the crowd interrupted and shouted whenever they disagreed. Voting was done by a show of hands. Question 6. Why are Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates famous even today? Answer. The important feature that set the Greeks apart from others in Europe was their learning and education. Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Archimedes, who are famous for their knowledge and admired even today. Herodotus is called the father of history. Pythagoras' theorem. Pythagoras' theorem about triangles is still in use today, and Archimedes is considered the most brilliant mathematician and engineer of his time. Athens was the seat of knowledge in those days. Greeks were the first people to write books on history and geography. Question 7. What was Alexander's role in the spread of Greek influence and culture? Answer. Greek scientists, doctors, architects, and scholars traveled with Alexander's army. Alexander left Greeks in every country he conquered. They spread Greek language, culture, and ideas in a scale such as had never happened before in the world before. Greek styles of art and architecture spread widely. During his conquests, Alexander found 25 Greek style cities. They were planned and laid out in a grid pattern with marketplaces, buildings, and statues in the Greek style. Question 8. Alexander wanted to conquer the known world. Did he succeed? Name the empires he fought with and conquered. Answer. Alexander, who at the age of 20 decided to conquer the known world both in the east and the west. He had been educated well. He was a pupil of Aristotle and trained in military leadership by his father. Alexander was successful as a conqueror because of his military tactics and the skill of his army. Alexander defeated the Persian led Darius III and destroyed their capital, Pers- Per- Persepolis, in 331 BCE. He then marched on with his army right up to the banks of the Indus and defeated the Hindu king Porus. In the brief span of 10 years, Alexander had created a large empire comprising Egypt, Persia, Mesopotamia, present day Turkey, and Israel, and the Indus Basin, the subcontinent. Complete the statements below. 1. The Greeks lived in settlements around the Aegean Sea. 2. King Philip was the ruler of Macedonia, a state in the north of Greece. 3. The two most powerful states in Greece were Athens and Sparta. 4. Herodotus was known as the father of history. 5. The Greek army formation was known as the phalanx. Thanks for listening. For new videos, don't forget to subscribe my channel. And if you like my videos, please share and like.